Square Enix's journey in re-releasing their pre-3D creations for the 50th time is finally coming to an end. Fortunately, they're wrapping up with the best of the best. That's right, Final Fantasy VI Pixel Perfect Remaster is almost here, and that's a big effing deal. The sixth entry in the series is easily one of those games that any RPG enthusiast, new or ancient, should play. I am the most passionate about this game, and you can hear some of my thoughts comparing it to its brothers and sisters from this shameless plug about the Final Fantasy episode of our podcast. Hey gamers, this is Patrick and Jason. Welcome to RPGaymer episode 5, a podcast about Final Fantasy! Final Fantasy VI is not only at the top of many which Final Fantasy is the best lists, but it's also usually referred to as one of the best RPGs of all time. And it shares a spot in the holy trinity of Super Nintendo RPGs with Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG. Also, Square Enix, I know you're listening. Remake these two. Okay, bye. It's true that these pixel-perfect remasters have not been completely embraced with open arms, and the concerns are certainly valid. Purchasing a game that is almost 30 years old with a hefty price tag doesn't sit well, especially when we're in a sea of new releases on current-gen consoles like Horizon Forbidden West, Pokemon Arceus, Elden Ring, and upcoming re-releases that have never left Japan like Front Mission and Live Alive. 100% do not blame you if you're more excited for those. Also, these remasters are missing content that were tacked onto later ports. Some of the previous Final Fantasy re-releases are, in some capacity, vastly superior to both the original and these pixel-perfect versions. For example, Final Fantasy IV's PSP release is already visually stunning and added bonus dungeons, and the After Years expansion, which, for those of you who don't know, is a complete direct sequel. Final Fantasy V's Game Boy Advance release added additional classes and post-game dungeons, which, while not drastically improving the overall experience of the game, did add something more for those who still wanted to suckle from Square Enix's teat. I can't believe I just said that. So, this begs the question, why buy the Final Fantasy VI Pixel Perfect Remaster if it's missing the additional content added in the Game Boy Advance release? Well, for starters, it's not the sloppy app version from 2014 that looks like it was made on RPGmaker. 'Cause girl, ya nasty. Jokes aside, games like Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy V benefited from the additional content, as Square was still trying to figure things out on their first run through development. However, the original Final Fantasy VI was already several steps up from its predecessors, and Final Fantasy XIII. I'm going to try to explain why you should buy this game without spoiling too much for those who haven't played it yet. 6's plot revolves around Terra and her unique position in the Imperial Army. It's kind of reminiscent of the early Star Wars movies, Empire and all. Though the early plot revolves around Terra and how her decisions carry enough weight to tip the scale between good and evil, Final Fantasy VI highlights most of its cast more than any Final Fantasy up to this point. Most of the characters have story arcs that get highlighted as they go through some form of life crisis or pivotal change in their beliefs. There are even a few points over the course of the narrative that make you question who actually holds the title of the lead protagonist. I think it sets a great trend for not only Final Fantasy games, but on how a fully fleshed cast truly makes for a great story, as opposed to just relying heavily on one lead protagonist. It may not go into the depths of some of the heavier hitters like Final Fantasy IX's rich cast or Final Fantasy X's abundance of screen time, but you could definitely see the impact this game had on their development. Also, again, without ruining too much, Final Fantasy VI, barely arguably, has the strongest villain in the series. Outside of story and characters, Final Fantasy VI is also worth picking up for its tight and, quite sincerely, timeless gameplay. This was the first game where we can see how smooth the ATB system can be versus how clunky it was in Final Fantasies IV and V. Because of this, combat is super fast-paced and engaging. The music slaps, there's a gripping opera scene, the graphics are stellar and crisp, the towns, dungeons, monster details, and character animations really pop. My one gripe about the PS1 era games is the rough edges of the polygons really omit some of the details that made monsters, characters, and villains cool. 6 just doesn't have this problem. Also, all the characters have their own flavor of uniqueness that they bring to combat, from sawing villains in half to dancing monsters into oblivion. And about a quarter of the way through the game, Final Fantasy VI even includes a way to start customizing your characters. Sorry for the vagueness, but again, spoilers. I think a lot of us gamers get disappointed when we get a remaster or a remake that doesn't push our gaming systems to the graphical limits. It's always cool to see a great game get a Queer Eye level makeover that elevates the overall experience. However, this pixel perfect remaster will be the ultimate way to celebrate this entry's original success, even if it wasn't made on the Unreal 4 engine. Several newer gamers would have the opportunity to pick this game up in its original form. Even though the pixel perfect remaster looks shiny and new, it still attempts to keep the nostalgia intact, and that is very much appreciated. As a Final Fantasy expert, I say that the pixel perfect Final Fantasy VI Remaster will be worth the investment whether it's your first or 50th time through the game. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a train I need to suplex.